Well, I don't know. Well, I guess I finished the last thing today. I figured out how to park as a retiree. And Friday, I am retired from the university. And January the 15th, I will come back in a new part time position that we will define on Wednesday.
Like a phoenix.
I think, frankly, the new position is going to be kind of identical to what I've got. It'll just have interim in front of the title. Other than that, I don't think anything changes. But
Oh,
I think it's one of those deals. But
well, congratulations.
yeah, tell you what, it's a lot harder to get out than to get in. Let me tell you, the amount of paperwork is staggering.
Oh my. Jim, I see you're on twice.
There you go. That's the challenge of connecting and reconnecting.
Hey, good. Yeah, so we've got a good connection, though.
Yeah, that's good.
Excellent. Hey, Jim, what's one thing you want to complete before your year is done?
Just to get out of here alive. Oh, no, I think I said the other day, Dan, I was going to limp across the finish line. It's that last 100 meters of the marathon, when the legs go to jelly. That's where I am. So bring on the weekend, I say.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. I can empathize. So,
yeah.
Madhavi, am I pronouncing your name right?
Madhavi.
Madhavi.
Yes.
So welcome. What's one thing you would like to get completed before your year is done?
I would like to properly clean my desk. It is worse than usual at the moment, and I would feel so much better in the new year if I walked into a clean desk.
Yeah, it's good to have goals.
I know. I was like, I'm not making it hard on myself. Just clean my desk.
Okay. Well, I hope you can accomplish that. That sounds good. No, my. So, Craig, what's welcome, and what's one thing I should have had you guys talk about the teams you're on, but for your sake, if you've not had a chance to watch the videos, you may not know everybody. We kind of continue to morph as we move forward. But Craig is working with. You want to introduce yourself and the team you're on, and what's one thing you hope to accomplish before the end of the year?
Sure. Well, I'm on the Community Wellbeing Quality of Life Studies team, and no, things are good. I'm really trying. For all of you who work with graphic designers, you know that you have to have patience when you're not top priority. So I'm really trying to get the next issue of Community Development Practice out, so then we can move to our special issue together.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know that's a lot of work.
Yeah, but I'm glad that we outsource the graphic design, but it requires patience on my part when you're low priority.
Yeah. Hey, I've got a question about that. Do you need anything in writing or an outline or anything, or what our timeline to be able to submit articles for the next
I think it would be wonderful, Dan and Chris, if you could just collect from all the teams to see if they're interested on doing a practice piece on their work. And then it can be very academic and things like that. That's great. If people aren't interested, you don't have to be. But I'm willing to take on the finding the peer reviewers and do those things. But if you all want, if Chris and Dan, you could be guest editors, I think that would be great. Just see who's interested, and then we can accommodate up to as many submissions, but within reason, I suppose.
Okay.
Oh, and then regarding your question on timeline, if we could get sort of the collection of here's all the people that are interested, then we can do sort of like a subgroup if we want on a timeline. And I'm thinking, if we're good stewards of our time, we could perhaps put together some small pieces by March and then go through the process and maybe even have it ready for the conference. It's ambitious, but I think it's doable.
That may be ambitious. We'll see where people are at in the projects, but I like that. And we hadn't really talked about which issue and when and how that was going to work. So, team, if you're paying attention and taking notes, the idea is that the CD practice that the Community Development Society puts out might be able to host and or be a venue for us to write about our community strengthening activities, whatever that might be for each of our teams, and what we're learning. And so what we're talking about is is just actually collecting interest from you guys and your teams to talk about what you're learning and to see if you'd like to be a part of that CD practice. Craig is saying maybe by March, but that does seem fast.
End of March.
Oh, well, that's different. They can do that.
Be everyone's spring break task, but
yeah, exactly.
No, so we can see among who's interested in what's reasonable, but we have a lot of flexibility. That's the nice thing about community development practice. And so I sent everyone the link in the chat. And so if you want to check it out, see the most recent issue. It was on a little bit of a hiatus for a while. Now we're bringing it back. And so the last issue was well received. I'll have another one out hopefully soon. And
that's awesome.
And then and I already have some more articles that are ready to get published in the next one. So we're doing well. And I think special issues would be a really cool trajectory, especially to highlight the good work everyone's doing.
I think that could be really good too. So just from on the folks that are on the call, are there people that are interested in contributing to that CD practice?
Yeah, I think this is Sharon. I think that I would be, and I think some of our other members of our team would be.
Good.
This is Aaron. I'm on the phone. I think we would be interested. Madhavi, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we would be. We just have to talk it over with Virginia and the rest of them, but I think we would be.
Yeah.
Hey guys, this is Ashley. I'm on the phone and on the computer, but without a webcam right now. So yeah, I think we'd be interested.
Just to let everyone know, it is peer reviewed and it's free, open access to everyone. So there's no fee, there's nothing.
Hey, Craig, one other question. Chris, is that you? Jim, are you sharing your screen?
I think that's Angela.
Okay. Angela may be sharing her screen. We've been taken over. So I don't know who's doing that. But anyway, I did have a question and I don't remember what it was, Craig. Sorry, it'll come back to me. So I know Angela was having a hard time getting audio. Have you had any success there, Angela? Give us a thumbs up. Not yet. She's still working on it, I guess. So, well, let's continue with the check-in. And Craig, I do think we've got some interest and I think that there'll be some good articles for that. We'll have to talk about when, kind of the link. Oh, I know what I was going to ask. You said you had shared that. Did you send that to everybody on Fellows group?
I put it in the chat just right now.
Oh, awesome. Okay, good. Thank you. So let's keep going around. So where were we? John Hill, do you want to check in and tell us your team and what you hope to accomplish before the year's out?
Oh, I'm on the Young Professionals Graduate Students team. One thing, I don't know why I did this to myself. I thought, hey, maybe I could turn out a publication during the Christmas break. So I'm hoping to have a manuscript written up that needs minimal revisions from faculty that I'm collaborating with before 2018. So that is my goal.
That is an awesome goal. Is it it related to this project, or it's a different?
It's a different one, but I would also like to add that my group, we would like to get on board with the community development practice pub as well.
As long as you can have it to us by the end of December, that'd be awesome.
Okay, I'm out.
I'm kidding. All right. Gary Gorham, welcome.
Hello, I am here, and I am representing, I guess, I'm with John on the Student Fellows, being a lifelong learner. I guess that includes me as a learner. And then also with the international group. And with the international, we have two types of discussion groups going on. One of them that we're going to be doing starting in January will be to talk about community development education. And our goal is to have people joining us on Zoom once a month for 6 months from around the world. So we'll hear what the folks in Korea are doing by way of community development ed, in Australia, New Zealand, Australia, England, and various points in the US. So the idea is to swap notes on all of that and engage in that conversation. The idea also then will be to liberally steal ideas from each other for our own respective programs. So that is in the planning, up and running. We have names. We don't have the date yet for that, but that will be forthcoming. I'll just add also to John Hill's conversation. We had our first student meeting here at North Dakota State University, pizza and pop meeting. Not a huge group of attendees. There were 6 of them, but we did talk about professionalization, community development society, and some of the benefits related thereunto. And we will be having those monthly starting here in December. We've already had our first.
That's awesome. I love that. So Gary, do you guys have that in a format that's replicable, or is it just basically you just do it?
What we did for which one, the student professional or the international?
The student.
Okay, what we did on that one was I sent out a notice to all of our master students who are doing things in community, and we have a CD minor. We don't have an undergrad degree, but a minor, and probably about a good dozen students in that. So that certainly, I can send you my email on that, my flyer. The other thing that I did was to make a list of, probably about 10 of our relatively recent graduates in community development here at NDSU, and what they're doing, their job description, their location. And I went around and talked about each one as if to say, yes, boys and girls, you too could do this very thing. And that I can certainly send to you. It just has these graduates' photographs and location and job title. So if y'all would like that, I would be delighted to send that, maybe send it to Dan, and you can circulate as you wish, or I could, John, I guess it really is our group. I should send it definitely to us. So whatever we would like from there.
Yeah, my thinking was just that if you had a successful kind of formula of connect with, reach out, and organize some students, maybe some key questions that you asked, or some things that tended to work well, that could be, if it were shareable.
Yes, that would be in my flyer that I distributed, posted around, and it lists the kinds of questions that we were beginning to address. And I can certainly share that, and I'll keep you appraised on the results on upcoming conversations.
Excellent. I think that would be great. Ashley or Angela, Angela, are you connected?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hey, yes, we can hear you.
Hey, yeah. Hi.
So what do you want to, so Angela is also with, which team are you working on?
I'm part of Gary's team as well. I've not been in the game for quite a while. Last meeting I lost connection, so I'm still kind of trying to catch up on
good.
stuff.
It's good. So that'll be your goal for the end of the year is to catch up.
Yeah.
I will say that we have the video Zoom meetings recorded.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you can go onto YouTube and watch them, and they are on the Community Innovation Lab website.
All right, okay.
So,
Christina, Chris, she had she'd sent me the link the last time, but I couldn't find it. So I was trying to get Brian to support me with that. I'll have another look on the lab, the website.
I'll find it while we're talking, and make sure that I post a link to it.
Yeah, yep. That would be great, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'll post it in the chat. So while I do that, Ashley Flintoff, welcome.
Hi, thank you. So I'm with Madhavi and Aaron and Virginia on I think we're the urban team. Is that what we're called? Sorry, what I was a couple minutes late trying to connect in. What else am I supposed to say?
It's all right. This is just a quick check-in. So I was asking people if they had something that they wanted to accomplish before the year ends.
Oh man, I think I have so much on my list of things to do. I think just checking something off of that list would be an accomplishment.
That
so
works.
yeah, just kind of try to whittle down that to-do list a little bit.
I like it. That works. So, well, let's keep going with the check-in, and then Aaron, welcome.
Hi.
See you.
Nice to see you too. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. What do I want to accomplish by the end of the year? So like Madhavi, I really like to clean my desk, but I think I might be saving that for January 2nd. But I think just, check a few things off my to-do list, answer a few more emails, and set an away message.
We're running out of time, so yeah, it's good to get that correspondence in and information in. Thank you, Aaron, for your work on that last, by the way. So.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for doing the bulk of the work.
And then let's see. There's one other person on the line that I don't have a name for, it's just a phone number. So who else is on the call that hasn't been introduced yet?
That might be me. This is Ashley. That might be me again.
Hi, Ash.
I called in first, and then because I couldn't get it working, I'm on a different computer. I couldn't get it working on my computer, so I called in from my phone, and then I got it working on the computer. So I might be on there twice.
Okay, we're good. Have I missed anyone? Well, let's launch into this a little bit. One of the things that we were planning on doing was working in some subgroups while we're on the call. I think that we don't have enough team representatives from all of our subgroups to break up into groups. But what I did want to do was circle back and give a big picture and then ask you a whole bunch of questions. The big picture, as we started into what does community look like? Even though we might be pursuing strengthening community in a community change team or in an urban neighborhood or among partners that are collaborating to do community a place like in Detroit. What does community look like when you're trying to form it among students across the United States? What does community look like when you're trying to bind a group together or bring a group together internationally that have so many barriers in time and distance and languages and cultures, etc. we talked about this on our first meeting, and some of the things that we identified as kind of the basics of community. We said identity was one. We said that a community has a common purpose or goals. Group trust or group cohesion is important. A little bit about shared responsibility. But the reason I'm looping back here is because one of the big goals of this project, in my mind, is that through the Community Development Society, we can form these friendships and relationships and actually a small community of peers to think about and talk about and learn about community. What does community identity look like in the group that you're working with? Does it have a strong identity? I mean, and so that's a real question, guys. I mean, in your international group, we're kind of just trying to engage a whole bunch of people that are out there, and it's enough of a common thread that they have a sense of community, or is that what we're trying to create? And how do you do that?
Dan, this is Ashley. I'll jump in.
Yeah.
And Aaron and Madhavi, correct me if you disagree, because I'm going to be speaking specifically to my experiences in Detroit and working with different communities. And I think the concept of identity can sometimes be touchy, but also is really the binding factor. And I know in Detroit, there's a very strong sense of community as a whole, but then when you unpack that, there's different smaller kind of community groups within that Detroit that have very strong identities and very strong feelings about their identity. And I think when you're doing community development, for me at least, identity is kind of where I start, but not to create it, but more to understand it, because generally I think as practitioners, when we're going into these groups, we're not necessarily part of that group. And I would venture to say that 90+% of the time we're not part of that identity. We don't hold that identity. And so I think the biggest part for community development and identity is just really acknowledging that it's a strong part of what makes a community, and being able to step back and learn identity and understand it so that you can then move forward in a way that is sensitive to the community that you're working with.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Ashley. Yeah. So how do you facilitate that, though? If it's a group that doesn't seem to have a lot of cohesion or kind of shared identity?
Sure. And so I think, and admittedly, I'm coming from the design perspective. So for me, it's a lot of it's visual. So doing a tour around a neighborhood, let's say, or even taking members of a neighborhood to other neighborhoods and starting to have them self-identify things that they agree on, disagree on, things that they recognize as something that either they own or they don't. And it's sometimes it's as easy as pinning up a bunch of pictures and saying, essentially, do you identify with any of this? Where do you see this in your community? And I think when you get people when you break it down to that level, and it's visual, and most humans understand visual, right? So I think breaking it down to visual pieces helps people start those conversations and find their shared identity. I know that there's a lot of other pieces to that, but for me, that's been particularly effective.
I like that. I keep thinking, not to change off Detroit, but
no, sure.
We've got a group of the students, and Gary and John. Do students want to? in CDS, do they identify with being a young professional? Do they want to be separated out? And how do you help these groups that are meeting in different locations have a sense that they're part of something bigger? I mean, that they're part of a network of students. Is that important? And how do you create that identity?
Dan, I think that's something that's going to take me a little bit more time to figure out, because we're kind of still in the creation process of what's going on here. So when you talk about identity, yeah, I think we all have that identity of a young professional or graduate student. Like, what do we have as a collective identity, and what does that look like? And I think that's the whole purpose of our project. So I won't have an answer for you until like August of 2018.
I can maybe speak to that. And Angela, you can probably also offer some comments on that. But when we held our meeting the other day, we had 6 students who are undergrads. I think we had 1 graduate student and 1 other faculty member, plus myself. And with the students, it was very evident that they are members of more than one community, community of interest. We had different identities. So, for instance, one group, I think, saw themselves simply as students, and I'll call them the glorified high school kids. We have another group that were there that I'll call professionals in training, and they were very interested in the CDS. The first group was more interested in pizza than they were in much else. And I think even as I look around my department, we're in the middle of finals week, and I have to have all my grades in by noon tomorrow, or otherwise World War III begins, I guess. So it's very bad to have happen. And so anything that's going on besides is irrelevant. So I'm in more than one community myself. And so it's an issue of priorities. Which of these multiple communities will one move to priority at any point in time? Well, evidently, since only half of our students who were potential to show up, in fact, no, only a third, it was clear that they had competing community responsibilities or interests at that point. So I think part of it is for us to recognize that and not be discouraged if there are competing interests, competing identity, competing community responsibilities. Angela, what are your thoughts on that as a part of the student group, professional group?
Yeah, definitely agree with you. Similar, when you look at Glasgow, different kind of community groups, community interests, community identities, whether this could be a positive or a negative for some people. You look at certain like interests as in football teams, or interests as in, as what you said, people like pizza. Some people come together through that, but for me, it's a positive. When you look at community identity, it could be a community issue. Some people have a passion of maybe changing an issue within an area, and that will bring people together. So it's similar community identities across the world, I would say.
One thing I would add, Dan, is that it's not just identity, it's really about belonging and how people feel they belong. And we have a lot of communities where people are there, but they actually don't feel like they belong. And that could be young people, it could be people with disability, it could be all kinds of things. In the international side of CDS, obviously people are very diverse, but what we're trying to develop there is not just an identity around CDS, but also a sense of belonging and an ability to influence a positive outcome. And I think both those things are really critical to building community, that is a sense of belonging and a sense of motivation to make a difference. And I think that's critical to what we're trying to do with our development groups, particularly in the international side of things with Gary and co.
I like that, and I think you're right. I think Gary is right, and I think Aaron actually brought it up earlier, and that's that our attention or level of investment in different communities kind of tends to shift. And so again, it's a matter of saying, well, do you ever get your time of interest or focus, or do the other communities take precedence? And so how do we help kind of prioritize or move ourselves up on the list of being an important community that people are paying attention to? And I don't know if that's the right question even, but what I'm really trying to focus on is, I guess, who's done work in this area? Are there people that who tends to do this really well, form identity and be able to mobilize and get people to chime in? That question is maybe a bit rhetorical, but I mean, it really is saying, is this a webinar or something that we could host and say, hey, there's some research about that, or there's some people that we could learn from?
Well, again, it's a really critical question. It's the core of what we do in community development is how do people come together and develop a sense of community and do things collectively? That's a really fundamental question for CDS, and it's part of what we all do. So yes, it would be good to explore that in our groups, and there are thousands of examples of where that's happened, but it happens often through, unfortunately through crisis. There's often a crisis that brings people together that they have to address. But of course, there are thousands of examples of where there might be some inspirational leadership, or there might be some, fundamental community sort of motivation for something. But that's a pretty core question for all that we do, really.
Yeah, aside from...
With that in mind, Dan, it's an issue of community organizing, in a sense. It's something that political organizers, community organizers are very adept at. And I think one of the things they do is offer an invitation. And it's almost a direct personal invitation, but it's an invitation that has a sense of need or urgency. To knock on doors for a community organizer to simply say, would you like to come to a meeting and to talk about what's going on for you? There isn't necessarily a sense of urgency unless they're asked the question, and then that's raised to the surface. An example of that is, as I invited our students to come, I asked a series of questions. One of them is, what are you going to do with your degree? And do you have any ideas in mind? Well, some of the students weren't at a point where that was, they're only sophomores or juniors, and they're saying it's not an urgent issue. But I will guarantee you, I had some graduating seniors that were vitally interested in that. And suddenly I had their attention. When Jim and I get going on these groups for discussions, I'm supposed to get started on the CD education one. That would be my question, probably. What are you doing? What's working? What can we offer that will help you or you help us? I'm not sure what the grabber question will be to raise it to the top. I'm sure Jim's wisdom will help me on that, and Matt, maybe that of the group.
Actually, Gary, that's right on. When I was asking kind of what's that template or what seemed to work for you to get students engaged, I think you're right. That question is one that has a great sense of probably urgency and relevance to those students. I mean, to me, that is one of those kind of gold nuggets of how do you help elevate the importance or get people to tune in to what it means to be a part of this. What about a common purpose and goals? Not all communities have a common goal. I mean, they're not necessarily all working towards the same thing. I think of this as kind of the kind of like linking social capital. You can have some real strong ties, or you can have weak ties, and sometimes the strong ties become exclusive. I know, and but to have goals or to share responsibility within, how important is that? And the bigger question is that something that what I'm trying to also focus on is, as we're thinking about strengthening each of our communities that we're working with, is that an area that needs attention, is relevant at all?
Dan, this is Craig. To tie your questions together, the quality of life community well-being group, I mean, how we define community development is really the process and the tool to get to the outcome of well-being, and hopefully then support that well-being and keep it going. But you can look at it at very many angles, right? You can look at health, you can look at it at participation rates, you can look at it from social satisfaction, and there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. And so, community development has this diversity of definitions, which is good, because kind of all roads are aiming towards the same place. Now, how you define well-being has a lot of identity issues, political issues, and things like that. But I think the importance of having goals is just as important as having measurements for those goals. And whether those measurements are quantitative or qualitative, the ISQUALS group tends to be much more, the folks in the International Society of Quality of Life Studies tend to be more quantitative oriented in their presentations at the conferences I've been to, but they're now embracing more qualitative aspects. So I think it's really interesting that goals in sort of the context of that are only as good as the measures in many ways, but that may be changing. And so I think it's really, goals are important and measurement is important, but community development is what moves us through it, at least from our perspective.
I like that, Craig.
Dan, this is Sharon. I guess, again, the work that we do tends to be with an actual community, as in a town, like a geography. So I was kind of just thinking about how we approach that when we have what is often a kind of a disparate group of people, or in worst case scenario, 2 or 3 people that think they're speaking for the community. We've kind of moved our engagement now to kind of an application process where they actually fill out what looks like an application. It's really designed to kind of dig into to figure out how broadly supported in the community is this actual activity, or is it just 2 or 3 people that cook this up on their own? What's kind of the history of of this community working together? Give us some examples of when it worked, when it didn't work. How are you defining success out of this? Then that comes into kind of an interview where we continue to dig down into it. But one of the tools that we have found that's pretty effective in bringing that broad geography of people together is we use community capitals as kind of a framework, and we do a wide open public meeting. Anybody that wants to come can come to this first meeting, and we just talk through strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, barriers, challenges, all of them in the context of the community capitals. What we see happening there is because that way everybody's positive or negative gets recognized, it gets some affirmation because it's at least up on the wall. And I think it makes an impact as well when they see that others are seeing the community through their own eyes. In other words, this isn't just me that thinks this. There's more people than me that think this. It tends to be a great way for us to kick off that engagement with the community. So I'm not sure quite where you're going with the conversation, but that's kind of where my mind went with it.
Well, that's part of it. And thank you, Sharon. I agree. I think finding a common purpose is, when we're working with a community of place, that's kind of the primary outcome of this visioning. We're trying to have some kind of unified purpose. And then from that, you create some goals and hopefully get people engaged in working towards, activities or priorities. You can divvy that up, but that they roll up their sleeves and start to work together.
I wanted to piggyback on what Sharon said, because we just finished up a couple of projects. Well, one we finished, one we're in the middle of, but one was a small Minnesota community, and we asked the question like Sharon did, what do you want for your community? And it was just a fairly standard Midwestern, predominantly white community, and they were more individualistic, had a hard time answering that. We're also working with 7 districts on an Indian reservation not too far from here, asked the same question, and oh my goodness, the conversation was very, very clear. They knew what they wanted for their community, but I think that would highlight the difference between the primacy of the individual, like on the Midwest white community, and more the primacy of the group, which we would certainly see on that Native American community. But it was striking to see how unified and how articulate the people on the reservation were about what they wanted for their community.
You know, Gary, one of the things we've also created is just a simple little form, has a little graphic on it that says, how do you define success? And that we just ask each person, you know, if we came back to you a year, 2 years from now, what would have to be here for you to say that this was time well spent, that this was a success for you, for the community? You know, we get some really, really thoughtful responses from people because they don't have to say it out loud. They can just write it on a piece of paper. We get some pretty thoughtful responses out of people on that one. Dan, I might take this one other direction.
Yeah, please do.
You know, the Community Change Network, you know, I'm sure by now you've seen our proposal, but, you know, we've been working on and off for a couple of years with some of the largest foundations in the country that fund a variety of community development types of activities. You know, Annie, Casey, Kellogg, I mean, you know, it goes on and on and on. But the common thread that runs through all of them is this: we have spent millions, literally, over the last decade or 2 decades on these community projects, and we have absolutely no idea if our money has made any impact. They're struggling with, you know, we funded a project to do X and we funded a project to do Y, and that they really are interested in trying to come up with some kind of a set of measures around this nebulous community development concept, so that as they spend their money, they can look at broader impact. And that's kind of where that proposal that we've put together is to actually bring them together into a room and let's have that conversation. We've had it individually, now let's have it as a group. And that, you know, that was actually a surprise for us, because we would have thought that those funders who had been doing this for a long time had some set of metrics they were using, but turns out each funding activity came with its own set of metrics, and there wasn't this base set that they can work with. I think that's rather interesting, and I think that is a place where I think that Community Development Society has an opportunity there to have a little bit of an impact. I mean, just think that through just for a second. If we could actually help them craft the base set of measures that they would use to determine the viability of some of these community projects that they fund going forward, that could be a real benefit, I think, to our membership.
What? So there's 2 things going on in my mind right now. One is that we've gone. You've led us into a great explanation and segue into what the Community Change Network proposal is. One of the things that I was hoping for this project to be able to do is that we are a network of peers to give each other feedback. And so, given what Sharon's just shared, what are some thoughts or ideas might have, or ideas to share back with Sharon?
It's Dean here again. Sorry to interrupt. We've been pondering this question for a while here, and there's as we all know, there's a preference for hard data, and we've always suffered in community development because a lot of the things that we deal with can't be measured with, hard data and numbers. So one thing that we have to deal with is the fact that there's a really strong bias towards numbers and figures and things like that. While something might be difficult to measure, it doesn't mean it's not important. And the other thing I'd say is that there's no one measure, there's no one brilliant framework, there's no perfect way of doing this. It will depend on the context and the circumstances. But what we've found here is that the way to measure community resilience or well-being, or whatever you might call it, involves two things. One is we do need to use secondary data, things like educational attainment and those sorts of things, but we also need to include things that local people see as important for their community. How do people want their community to be is the most important question to ask in a community. So we're developing here a metrics process, I guess, where we do use that secondary data, but we also have a way of gathering input from local people in individual communities about the things that they value most about their community and how their community is tracking with regard to those things. So it could be everything from, how the town entrance looks to, how functional the sporting team clubs are. So we're working on this right now. But again, it's not meant to be a perfect framework. It's not meant to be something that's, use this everywhere. But that's just our thinking and our experience.
Someone else was going to speak too.
Yeah, I was going to just add the same. Over here, I feel funding kind of restricts what you can do within communities. When you're applying for funding, there's always barriers put in place or tick certain boxes. So it's quite hard to carry out a lot of hard kind of a community development to work at the heart within the community. For me personally, when you are restricted through funding to kind of work with people to access resources, and that is a kind of a massive barrier when you're trying to kind of make a difference or evaluate a process, and all they're kind of looking for is how many people you worked with. To me, it's all about the impact that you make to maybe a small group of people rather than working with double that amount but not really making a difference. So here in Scotland, that's funding is an issue that way when they kind of dictate where the money goes and how it works. It's kind of a difficulty here as well to try and make that impact with funding.
So it's an issue the world over. Yeah, I like what Sharon was saying though, and I'm taking notes as we're working, and I've got this idea of common identity, common purpose and goals, group trust and cohesion. And in some groups, common identity might be a priority. In some groups, it may not be as important. Having a common vision, how important is that for the international group? Or some shared goals? I'm not sure. I mean, that's a community that maybe doesn't rely so much on needing common purpose. And this idea of the funders network. I mean, so Sharon, when you're doing that, are there some kind of categories that say, is it a decision tree that you're looking at of saying, does the community have this, need this, think? Say more about kind of what, or at least what that conversation might look like when you get foundations together.
Well, I think part of it is what they're saying is, we funded a project to do a specific task, and it achieved that task, and it had that kind of impact. But that issue never seems to go away. It just keeps coming back and coming back. So I think they're beginning to wonder, are we truly having any long-term impact in communities? So I think what we're going to be working with them around is, well, trying to understand how would you define long-term change? Long-term change, and are you willing to do what it takes to measure long-term change? A lot of times these guys, they want to fund a project, they want you to have it done in 18 months, and then they want you to turn in a report and show all the great things that you did. Well, you're not going to have long-term impact in 18 months. I'm not so sure. In some communities you can have long-term impact in 3 or 4 years, but that's part of what, if you really want to have impact, then you guys are going to have to change the horizon, the way you look at change. And then if we try and get them to find some place, some common set of measures. Some of the stuff that Jim mentioned, I think those are appropriate changes. You're going to have to do some secondary data type things where you look at income and, and poverty and those kinds of things. But then there's still going to be those very specific issues. It could be access to food. It could be some of the interesting work that's going on up in Flint, Michigan, not so much with the water, but with just the whole violence in the community. I've got a friend that has been working there in Flint for a number of years, working on this idea of bringing people together to address the level of violence that children experience in Flint. So it's kind of all over the place, but Dan, I'm not sure. A decision tree probably could be the way they might approach it. It just remains to be seen. We've never been real successful in getting more than maybe 2 or 3 of them in a room at one time. And hopefully through this process, we're going to be able to get about a half a dozen or even a couple more from some of the big foundations there together to have this conversation. And it'll be the beginning, I don't see that as the end of the conversation.
Sure. Craig, could you, with the ISQUAL, are there indicators that that have been used that would may be helpful to this?
Yeah, I mean, we're still looking at mostly it's survey data, but then some people do look at macro social indicators. I mean, anyone who's really interested in that, I really do suggest checking out the 3 journals. And a lot of people in community development publish in them, but they're always looking for more. The 3 journals are the Journal of Happiness Studies. That one's really good. They're all good. The Applied Research and Quality of Life. I believe it's Quality of Life Studies, actually. And that's RQUALS, if you will. And then Social Indicators Research. And those are 3 really, really good journals if you're looking for measures, whether it be sort of macro, or if you're looking for even just how do you measure within a community, a neighborhood. They even have things on associations. They've done well. I'm working on a project that I was working on earlier this morning about how do older adults interact with smart technologies. I was like, I'm working with a bunch of engineers. It's very special. And they came to us, Rick Knopf and I, about, hey, you guys know community well-being. Let's look at that. And so first thing we did was go to the literature, and those are the 3 journals we looked at for those measures. So I really, I can forward you, I can put in the chat the links to those 3, but there's a lot of really good stuff out there. Joseph Sergi is really a prolific researcher, friend of Rhonda Phillips in those areas, but there's some good stuff. But I think that we do sort of lose. And I think community development, at least in the CDS context, does a really good job. And, it's up and down between quantitative and qualitative, but I think they do a really good job on sort of this qualitative storytelling and those things that might get overlooked by pure indicators research, if you will.
And maybe that ties back into what Jim was saying about getting that local perspective to the metrics from local, that storytelling. Guys, so we had hoped to work in teams and come back. Let me just ask, each of the teams is developing a proposal or has submitted a proposal. Are there questions that you have that you'd like to just gain from the benefit of some feedback or ideas of others here on the call? as you're working on your proposal? Do you have any questions that you'd like to bring up to the group? Or I'd like this this network to be able to be an opportunity to kind of bounce ideas off and hopefully strengthen our ideas as we're working on strengthening community.
Hey, Dan, it's me again. Sorry to say too much, but I have a question about the budget. We're looking to have a couple of international groups operate via video link over the next 6 months in the international space and with Gary. And we've got a budget of a couple of $1,000, and what we're thinking of is offering participants in those discussions and groups a possible scholarship to the conference. What's your thinking about that, and how might we make best use of the money?
That's a good question. It brings up, the idea of money is, there is something that we need to talk about that. But to your question, there really are a lot of parameters on this. I'm hoping that as board members, and Gary and Jim and Craig are currently on the CDS board, we're all working to be good stewards of those funds. The CDS funds are both to help us work on initiatives to try to further the field of community development, but also to try to connect with increasing our membership and the activity of our membership. And Jim, what you just said to me is really a good idea, to get people to the conference, to get them more engaged, and or to provide, like you said, scholarships with your CDS registration to a conference. I believe you become a member for a year. That's part of it. So that does help our membership as well. I think Chris might be back on the line, and I'll have her speak to it. But I like that idea, Jim, is if you wanted to look at the use of funds to help people get to the conference. Did I understand you right? Jim?
Yeah, that's right. And the hidden agenda is to gain more membership, of course. But we think if we were able to have, say, 2 or 3 consistent participants in those discussions, in those groups, that showed a real genuine interest and contribution, then we could, it would be wonderful to be able to defray their costs to come to the conference, particularly international people. The problem that we're going to have is how we select them, but that's a good problem to have. But I personally like the idea of us having a 6-month period of participative discussion and involvement from international people, with at the end of that a possibility of a scholarship to the conference. Now the problem's going to be timing, because we'll start these groups in January and the conference, of course, is in June. So we'll have to figure something out there. But that's our intention about how we might use some of the budget.
I think that's excellent. When you have those, are you going to do like we're doing? Is it a recorded Zoom meeting?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then if you can go online to the CDS and look at the discussion groups and see if I'm thinking we can post a video on our CDS website. If we can't, we'll have to work with our web designers to make certain that we can. But if you want to give some thought, maybe over the holidays, of what type of, I know if we're not IT people, it's tough to think in these ways. I'm just speaking for myself, but what that website needs to look like, or how to best get people to engage with it. But we can, if you've got ideas, we have some latitude of how we try to make that site interactive. And again, back to that, I'll pull it up while we're talking here. I wanted to Sorry, I'm fading here a little bit. Let me share my page. So if you go to the networking, to the CDS Connect, you'll see that there's the International Community Development site. And that's an area that if the international group wants to post discussions and invite people in, that's one way to be able to, or a site to try to engage more people in conversations. Are you seeing the CDS site? Okay. Madavi, you say yes? Good. You're the only one that I saw nod. So, and for community well-being, and Craig, I think, did you ask to change that title? And is this the title you were asking for?
Yep, that's the right title. Thank you.
Good, good. Okay, good. Urban community development, that's an area that if you guys wanted to just log into this, again, it's the CDS Connect, but start prompting some conversations. That'd be a good place to start, hopefully connecting with some of our audience or a broader audience. You can start promoting, Jim, when you've got the international. If you've got dates and times, we'll start sharing those. Yes, also. That's exceptional. Who else? Is there anybody else that would like to share their ideas on their proposal?
Well, I can speak for the Detroit group. We did submit a proposal. What we did is we decided we were really interested in the issue of community engagement as it plays in community development. And that's an evergreen topic of interest here in the city of Detroit. So we put together a proposal, our group did, about basically creating a learning community for community engagement and holding a series of gatherings with people here in the city who work in community development and maybe some other sectors, and really kind of come together and excuse me, do some group learning about, what are best practices and how can we kind of move the practice forward here in Detroit, and hopefully for the benefit of CDS in general.
I love it. I like that. Yeah, it is an evergreen topic. I'm sorry, somebody else? So Aaron, what, just out of curiosity then, as you do that, how will you capture that and share it back with the larger group?
Well, just going off the top of my head, we haven't necessarily discussed that in detail with our group, but since we've envisioned mostly in-person gatherings, since it's very locally focused here to the city of Detroit, I imagine there will probably be a lot of note-taking and probably recording of it through that way. I don't know if we've discussed any sort of other kind of higher technology. I don't know if we want to do video recording or anything like that, but probably note-taking. And Madhavi, you got something to add?
Well, I was just thinking that, again, just off the top of my head, at CDAD, we do have, a person on staff who does do a lot of storytelling and video work for us. So we may engage him for this to be one of the projects he works with us on. So he sort of documents our community planning work, our community engagement work. So it would be a natural fit for him to do some of his storytelling and video work around this particular issue. And I think there would be a lot of interest in that in general. I think maybe what we didn't capture in the application is that there's just a lot of decisions being made in Detroit right now, some under not the most transparent circumstances. There's a lot of, community engagement. There's a lot of complaints about how that is being defined and how it's being rolled out. So the timing also makes a lot of sense, just because it feels like there's a decision about everything right now or within the next 12 months. So I think the timing would work well as well. So I think there would be a huge interest across the city, not just the 5 of us in the group.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to push you. What we're interested in, of course, is that you're doing something that has, while it's your story, it's also our story in that engaging people successfully to come together and help push toward change. And so my thinking was, how does that story get kind of captured and retold? And it may be as the story unfolds, or in your case, it may be better do it at Detroit. At the conference, or say, hey, this is where we're at. This is kind of what we've been doing. This is where we've seen some success, and I don't know.
I think that is the one thing we did put in the application, is that we were hoping to do what you just said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have continued our conversations with CDS. We do have a time at the conference, I think around the opening session, where we'll be able to probably very briefly highlight what each of our projects are, not go into a lot of detail, but hopefully through other roundtable sessions or birds of a feather, or different opportunities. Remind me, how many of you had proposed that? I think I asked on our last call, and a couple people. You guys have is it a breakout or a presentation?
Sorry, were you asking the Detroit group?
Sure.
All right. We proposed something. I don't remember the exact format at this juncture, but we proposed some kind of informal or maybe breakout, or I don't remember what it was called. Roundtable, maybe?
Yeah, that sounds good.
And I'll say for the student young professional group, we also have a proposal in, but I can't remember what it was. It was birds of a feather, or roundtable, or that was 2 months ago that we proposed them.
I know. It seems forever ago. Well, so the good part of that is that we'll have an opportunity for some visibility and voice early on, and then hopefully more in depth as the conference goes on, if you've got a breakout session or a roundtable or some other event planned. So, guys, what other questions do you have? We've talked about Detroit. We've talked a little bit about the international project. We've talked about the community change team. Would any of the other teams like to ask questions or showcase a little bit what you were thinking? Craig, do you mind saying what with the International Society of Quality of Life Studies, one of the key elements there is that it's another association, and we're trying to figure out how do you work well between associations. And much like what Sharon is doing with foundations, that's another interest group. Can you give a little bit of an overview, or do you have any questions about the proposal that you're working on with ISQUALS?
Sure. We don't really have any questions. Basically what needs to happen is our team needs to really put down a solid plan for the best way to spend the money. But our ideas, some don't need the money and some may. We were thinking it would be really great to do some, joint webinars, that hosted by CDS and ISQUALS. We were thinking about figuring out ways of doing a particular track or event at each respective conference. And so, ISQUALS is having their conference in Hong Kong, and then in June, and we're having our conference in Detroit. And so, maybe at the next conference, at the 50th anniversary of CDS in Columbia, Missouri, having a special ISQual's track or something. And so we're sort of looking at investigating things that we can propose to CDS, and whether the money gets spent on some of those things or whether it gets spent on a whole different idea, because some of these things don't need money. So that's what we're trying to figure out. Honestly, we're kind of like trying to, we don't want to waste the funds, but we want to make sure that they're used in line with our purpose. And so I need to work with Rhonda and her students, and we'll get back in touch with that. But I'm very hopeful we'll have a good report at the January meeting. I know Rhonda's got things in the works already.
Okay. Yeah. Money is great. Money is one of those things that, as we were talking about earlier, what brings things to the surface as priority or gives them a sense of urgency. Money tends to do that. And so it's helpful, but also I hope that it's not the only reason that, that it drives your decisions, that we can work this in a way that helps, again, expand communities and be a learning tool. So
absolutely. We're just trying to come up with some models that are sustainable, and whether those include using the money towards that or, either way, we'll still do the stuff that doesn't involve the money too.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I see we're dwindling in our group here. Chris Haynes has posted in the chat the site at the Community Innovation Lab. We scroll down to the bottom of the page on web links. Let me see if I can do that. Let's see here. Does your screen have light bulbs on it?
Yes.
Good. So I thought I would follow the directions. Oh, here they are. So resources, web links. Okay. So these are, if you collect on these, you'll see the October and November, and then we'll post the December Zoom chat here. If you click on it, it'll bring you out to YouTube. We'll just go around the group and see if, and we don't need to relive that right now, but but there it is. So hopefully that'll be helpful. Again, we went to the Community Innovation Lab website as an easy access point for us to be able to share ideas. Ultimately, I'd like to push us back towards the Community Development Society page, because that's really where we're trying to engage membership, is back in at CDS. So, guys, what other questions do you have? I think we're doing good work towards trying to be purposeful. Jim, you said, communities are formed out of crisis, and they are, but I think what we do with community planning and with purposeful community development is not wait for a crisis, but we tend to weave communities together, build communities through, I think, helping them find either that identity or shared purpose, that common trust, shared responsibility. And so the question is, how do we do that within the context of the groups that we're working with? We've got proposals, I think, from most of the groups. I'm not sure that we have the one from ISQuals yet. We're not trying to hold up on funds. We do hope to be able to figure out how we're going to share these. And so, Chris, if you're on, you might speak up. But
I'm here.
Okay. Oh, good. So if your group has a nonprofit organization or a foundation that can receive funds, what we found, I think, is that we can distribute them, but receiving them, sometimes if you're at a university, the university sees that as income and takes overhead out of it. And if you think it as an individual, then it becomes personal income. So
my plan, guys, is I have kind of chatted with each group individually, and I have kind of a head person in each group that I will be contacting in order to chat with you about what the best way is to get money to you I feel like we had a good conversation today about the different projects going. And so each one of you has included a budget within those projects, which is great. And once we kind of have a good feeling for how the money is going to be spent in those budgets, then and so this will actually happen probably right after the holidays, where I will be in contact with you by email in order to get it set up so we can get the money to you at your nonprofit or your university. We'll figure that out. But I will be in contact, like I said, with the head of each one of the groups, of each of the 5 groups. So it should be happening sooner than later.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Chris. So are there any other questions from the group for this month? Once again, we will kind of create a short write-up blog about this. Do we have any volunteers that would like to be a part of that process? If you haven't seen it, the blogs from each of our sessions is being posted out on the CDS blog. And hearing none, it's really pretty painless, isn't it, Aaron?
Well, you did most of the work. To be honest, because
I was just impatient.
Vacation shortly after I agreed to do it. But you did a great job, and I was happy to chip in where I could. And
you did.
Sometime down the line, I'm sure I'll participate again, and probably in a more full fashion.
You did chip in, and it was actually it was very good. It was a much better article because of your contribution. So, excellent. Well, and I apologize for my impatience. I was just trying to kind of push it out. So,
fair.
But yeah, if anybody else would like to be a part of that, we can. Otherwise, watch for it. Tell your friends and family. Share it as a Christmas letter. Network it widely and as broadly as possible. So, well, with that, guys, I'm going to have to sign off here, but let's look forward to being in touch, hopefully by email. And I like the idea of getting a fresh start in the new year. Jim will watch for that list of videos that you're going to be setting up.
Yeah, right.
No, really. And
we'll progress our groups. Yeah.
Yeah. If there's a way that we can help, let's just keep in touch. So, well, happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you. You too.
All right. We'll see you in the new year.
Happy holidays.
Thank you, Chris, for recording.
Absolutely. We'll have it up soon.